The sun shone like melted gold across the huge Louisiana estate, painting the perfectly trimmed lawns and rows of cotton with the warmth of a fake peacefulness. To outsiders, the Duval plantation was the perfect picture of Southern wealth and elegance. A grand mansion with polished pillars, gardens carefully maintained, and a household where appearances were everything. But behind the surface of order and elegance lay a tangled web of desire, obsession, and forbidden attachment, one that threatened to consume every soul within the estate's walls. Jonathan Duval, the master of the plantation, was a man accustomed to power, control, and the unquestioned obedience of those around him. His wife, Eleanor, elegant and manipulative, wielded her own authority with subtle cruelty, ensuring that the household remained under her control. But none of that power could contain the unexpected storm brewing in Jonathan's heart. An obsessive attachment to Celeste, a young enslaved woman of remarkable beauty and intelligence who served within the main house. Celeste had long known the dangers of her position. Any mistake could result in brutal punishment, humiliation, or death. Yet Jonathan's fascination with her, small gestures of attention and protection, carried both danger and opportunity. It was a dangerous game, one that could destroy them both if Eleanor discovered the truth. And Eleanor would discover it. She always did. This is the story of a forbidden attachment, a passion entangled with cruelty and society's strict rules, and the consequences of love and obsession in a world built upon oppression. Before we step inside the fancy walls of the Duval estate, ask yourself, where are you watching from? What time is it? And can you imagine standing witness to a fire that smolders quietly until it consumes everything? Drop a comment below. And if stories of desire, danger, and revenge pull you in, hit subscribe, because what you're about to hear is a tale long hidden behind wealth, manners, and fear. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Duval mansion, lighting up the polished floors and fancy furniture with an almost cruel perfection. Servants moved quietly through the halls, attending to their duties with practiced obedience. Among them, Celeste carried trays of breakfast, her movements precise, her eyes aware of every glance and whisper. She had learned early to move like a shadow, visible yet unnoticed, always balancing survival against the dangers of curiosity or favor. Jonathan Duval entered the breakfast room with a deliberate walk, polished boots clicking against the wood. His eyes, however, lingered not on his wife, Eleanor, seated with her usual haughty composure, but on Celeste. There was a subtlety to his attention, an inclination that spoke of fascination, not of command, of desire, not obligation. The plantation had been his domain for years, a stage upon which he played the role of master flawlessly. Yet now the script was changing, and the object of his obsession moved among the tables, unaware of the power she held over him. Celeste felt it, an awareness that sent a shiver through her spine, equal parts fear and calculation. She had seen masters and overseers come and go, had witnessed desire twisted into control and cruelty. Jonathan's gaze was different, heavier, more unpredictable. She knew the danger inherent in his attention, yet she also recognized an opportunity, a slender path carved from the cracks in the rigid order that ruled the mansion. Eleanor, observing from across the room, sensed the shift immediately. Her eyes narrowed, the slightest curl of her lips betraying suspicion and irritation. She had long relied on the unquestioned loyalty of her husband, the deference of the household, and the strict hierarchy that placed her above every servant. But now an unfamiliar emotion gnawed at her. Jealousy, a dangerous, consuming jealousy that threatened to erupt with devastating consequences. The breakfast passed in a tense silence. The clink of silverware on porcelain seemed unusually loud. Every movement was charged with unspoken meaning. Jonathan's attention flickered between Celeste and Eleanor, a subtle tension rippling in the space between desire and propriety. The boundaries of the household had begun to blur, and the rules that had kept master and servant, husband and wife in place were teetering dangerously. Later, when the house was quiet, Celeste retreated to the servant quarters. She had learned long ago that moments of privacy were rare and precious. Sitting on the rough wooden bench, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, to think. Jonathan's ear glances, his fleeting gestures of favor, carried danger as much as promise. One misstep could ignite Eleanor's wrath or worse, provoke the master himself into an unpredictable and deadly temper. Yet within the caution, a spark of defiance ignited. Celeste understood her position. She was a pawn in a dangerous game. But pawns could also be moved, manipulated, and occasionally they could overturn the board entirely. As evening fell over the plantation, the mansion was bathed in the soft glow of lanterns. Shadows stretched across the polished floors, carrying with them the whispers of desire, ambition, and fear, and, in that quiet tension, Celeste resolved to survive, to navigate the dangerous currents that bound her to the master's obsession, and to find a way to turn it to her advantage. The stage had been set, the players in motion, and the first threads of a forbidden attachment were beginning to entwine, a dangerous bond that promised both danger and power. The days that followed were heavy with an unspoken tension. The air in the Duval mansion was thick with the scent of desire, jealousy, and unease. Jonathan's attention toward Celeste became more pronounced, though always hidden beneath the appearance of concern or instruction. Small gestures, a lingering glance, a subtle touch of her hand as she passed the plates, a word of praise spoken softly, meant nothing to the casual observer, but carried a weight that did not escape Celeste's keen awareness. She moved through the halls with measured grace, aware of every eye, every whisper. The other enslaved workers noticed the shift but dared not speak of it. Eleanor, however, saw everything. The mistress of the house, elegant in her silk gowns and cold composure, had built her authority on manipulation and observation. She had always known the power of fear and propriety, and now she sensed a threat to her control, a slow, insidious undermining of her position, centered on the young slave who dared to catch her husband's attention. Jonathan, for his part, found it increasingly difficult to conceal his fascination. He told himself it was protection, admiration, even affection. But in truth, it was obsession. Each time Celeste moved past him in the halls, his pulse quickened. Each time he found her alone in the kitchen or in the garden, his mind wrestled with both longing and guilt. The moral lines blurred in his mind. The plantation rules, societal expectations, and his own marriage became irrelevant in the face of the desire that consumed him. Celeste, ever cautious, understood the danger. A slave's life was precarious, balanced between obedience and survival. One misstep, one misinterpreted glance could provoke wrath, punishment, or worse. Yet she also understood the opportunity embedded within Jonathan's obsession. Power could be redirected, manipulated, and used. She would survive, and she would learn to navigate this treacherous bond for her own safety and advantage. Eleanor's suspicion had grown to a simmering fury. She had begun to watch Jonathan more closely, following him in subtle ways, observing the small smiles he offered Celeste, noting the delicate, almost imperceptible attentions he had reserved for the young woman. Eleanor's cold, calculating mind began devising ways to reclaim authority, to humiliate Celeste and remind Jonathan of his obligations. But her plots required precision. Overt action could draw attention and ruin her social reputation. The tension reached a breaking point one afternoon. Jonathan had summoned Celeste to the mansion's library, supposedly to organize record books and accounts. The room was quiet, filled only with the dust of old books and the sunlight streaming through tall windows. Jonathan's hands trembled slightly as he handed her papers, and for the first time he spoke directly of things that had little to do with work. "You handle yourself with a grace I did not expect," he said quietly, his voice heavy with something between admiration and longing. "I've never seen anyone like you." Celeste froze, masking the stir of fear and intrigue in her chest. She nodded respectfully, aware that any acknowledgement beyond propriety could be dangerous. "Thank you, sir," she replied carefully, her voice measured. But Jonathan's gaze lingered, and Eleanor, observing from the shadows of the corridor, caught a fleeting glimpse. Her lips tightened in a thin, cruel line. The jealousy that had simmered for weeks now flared into anger. She would not be bested by a slave, and she would ensure that both Jonathan and Celeste would pay the cost of their dangerous entanglement. That night, as the household slept, Celeste lay awake on the thin mattress in the servant quarters. She thought of Jonathan's gaze, of the precarious power he had inadvertently offered her, and of Eleanor's wrath waiting just beyond the walls. Every detail of the day had been a test, a demonstration of control, obsession, and danger. And yet within the fear she felt the first flickers of opportunity, an understanding that the master's desire could be a tool, a shield, and a weapon if wielded with care. The plantation was quiet under the moonlight, but the tension between master, mistress, and slave was electric. Jonathan's obsession would only deepen, Eleanor's fury would only intensify, and Celeste's path through this dangerous dance would require cunning, patience, and a precise understanding of power. In the shadows of wealth and luxury, a forbidden bond was growing, a bond that promised both danger and the possibility of empowerment in a world built on fear and obedience. The days on the Duval plantation had become a careful dance of glances, whispers, and stolen moments. Jonathan's fascination with Celeste had deepened, no longer merely curiosity but a consuming obsession he struggled to hide. He found reasons to summon her, whether to organize the household accounts, inspect the linens, or merely request her assistance with trivial tasks. But each encounter carried a tension that neither could ignore. Celeste, ever cautious, understood the danger of these meetings. To appear too eager would invite suspicion from Eleanor. To resist overtly could draw wrath from Jonathan himself. Yet she also understood the subtle power she now wielded. The master's desire was both a threat and an opportunity. She could navigate this dangerous terrain with precision, using the attention to her advantage while ensuring her survival. Every glance, every word, every gesture was calculated, a delicate balance between submission and control. In the library, hidden from the watchful eyes of the household, Jonathan and Celeste exchanged a quiet conversation. His voice, low and weighted with emotion, carried both admiration and obsession. "You move with a grace I cannot command," Jonathan whispered, leaning slightly closer than propriety allowed. I've never encountered anyone like you. Your intelligence, your poise, it unsettles me." Celeste met his gaze steadily, hiding the flinch that threatened to betray her. "I do only what I must, sir," she said carefully, her tone measured. "I am here to serve." But Jonathan's eyes lingered, unrelenting, and she knew that he understood far more than he allowed to show. Every word carried an unspoken tension, a silent acknowledgement of forbidden desires and dangerous inclinations. Outside the library, Eleanor watched from the shadows, her pulse quickening. She had long relied on her husband's obedience to the social script, and now she saw the cracks forming. Celeste, a slave, was capturing attention meant solely for her. Eleanor's mind raced, considering how to assert her dominance without exposing herself to scandal. She could not allow this bond to grow unchecked. Her jealousy was a silent, burning flame, one that would not be ignored. In the evenings, Jonathan found ways to extend his attention to Celeste subtly, a hand brushing against hers while arranging candles in the dining room, a quiet word of praise as she polished the silver, a fleeting look that lingered longer than propriety allowed. Each action was deliberate yet careful enough to avoid detection, or so he believed. Celeste, perceptive and strategic, mirrored his subtlety. She allowed moments of proximity and conversation while maintaining her composure, ensuring that no misstep would trigger Eleanor's wrath. Every interaction was a test of desire, of patience, and of control. She had learned long ago that survival in the household required both caution and cunning. Meanwhile, Eleanor's scrutiny intensified. She followed Jonathan at discreet intervals, noting his attention toward Celeste, observing the soft smiles and lingering glances. She began manipulating the environment, shifting schedules, inserting herself into spaces, watching for any opportunity to humiliate or punish the young slave. Her cruelty, cloaked in elegance, was patient and calculated. The tension within the household grew palpable. The air seemed charged with anticipation. Every hallway a stage for subtle confrontations and hidden agendas. The servants whispered cautiously among themselves, aware that something was shifting in the mansion, though none dared speak openly. Celeste lay awake each night, listening to the creaks of the mansion and the distant sound of Eleanor's footsteps. Her mind ran through every interaction, every glance, and every opportunity. She understood the dangerous balance she now occupied. The master's obsession was both a lifeline and a threat, and Eleanor's jealousy was a weapon waiting to strike. Yet amid the danger, Celeste felt a flicker of empowerment. For the first time, she realized that she could manipulate the situation, wield influence over the very people who had long ruled her life. The secret meetings, the stolen glances, and the whispered words in hidden corners were more than survival. They were preparation. Preparation for a reckoning that could redefine power within the household. The stage was set. The forbidden attachment deepened, and the tension between master, mistress, and slave edged ever closer to confrontation. In the fancy halls of the Duval mansion, desire, fear, and ambition coiled tightly together, each ready to strike when the time came. The mansion had never felt so tense. The polished floors of the Duval estate seemed to reflect not just sunlight, but the undercurrents of desire, jealousy, and fear that had grown between Jonathan, Celeste, and Eleanor. Every glance exchanged, every movement through the hallways was loaded with unspoken meaning. Jonathan's obsession had become more obvious. Small touches, secret words, and lingering looks. But Eleanor's suspicion had grown to a sharp, burning fury. She would not allow her authority or her pride to be undermined. It began subtly at first. Eleanor would position herself in rooms Jonathan frequented, timing her steps to intersect with Celeste's movements. She would offer pointed comments, a raised brow, or a quiet cutting question meant to unsettle both the master and the slave. "Is that your work, Celeste?" she asked one afternoon as the young woman polished the silverware. Her tone was calm, but the underlying venom was unmistakable. Jonathan's attention, previously so focused on Celeste, flickered momentarily toward his wife. Celeste, ever cautious, did not falter. "Yes, ma'am," she replied smoothly, keeping her head bowed just enough to show respect while preserving her dignity. Every syllable, every pause was calculated to avoid provocation while subtly signaling her awareness of Jonathan's divided attention. But Eleanor's patience was wearing thin. She had begun planning a confrontation, one that would publicly humiliate Celeste and force Jonathan to choose where his loyalties truly lay. The mistress of the mansion understood the power of spectacle. Her husband had relied on it to control others, and she would use the same principle against them. The opportunity came one evening during dinner. The dining room, adorned with fine china and flickering candlelight, was filled with the family and a few visiting planters. Eleanor maneuvered the conversation skillfully, weaving subtle hints and pointed remarks aimed at both Jonathan and Celeste. "Celeste," Eleanor said sweetly, her eyes glinting, "you have a remarkable way of drawing attention, don't you? Some might even say too much." She let the words hang in the air, heavy with implication. Jonathan's fork paused mid-air. The other guests shifted, sensing the tension, though they could not discern its source. Celeste kept her composure, but a flush crept to her cheeks. She realized the precariousness of her position. Eleanor's words were a warning, a trap, and an assertion of power all at once. The eyes of the household now fell on her, and she felt the weight of centuries of oppression in that single, deliberate gaze. Jonathan, torn between his obsession and the strict rules of propriety, attempted to diffuse the tension. "Eleanor, please," he murmured, a hand brushing Celeste's in a gesture of protection, but one that only intensified the scrutiny. Eleanor's lips curved into a thin, victorious smile. She had confirmed what she suspected. Jonathan's attention had shifted, and the household now knew it, even if only partially. Later that night, Eleanor confronted Celeste privately in the servant quarters. The mistress's voice was low but sharp. "You will remember your place," she hissed. "Do not think for a moment that your beauty or your intelligence grants you power here. One misstep and I will make sure you regret it." Celeste bowed, her heart pounding, but her mind remained alert. She understood that Eleanor's threat was both a warning and an opportunity. Jonathan's obsession could be a shield, but it could also be a weapon if wielded correctly. She had to navigate this danger carefully, maintaining the delicate balance between submission and influence, obedience and self-preservation. Meanwhile, Jonathan paced his private study, torn between desire, duty, and fear. His obsession with Celeste had grown into a consuming force, blinding him to the potential consequences of his actions. He knew Eleanor would not relent, and that the household was a minefield of jealousy, scrutiny, and societal expectation. Yet he could not turn away from the pull he felt toward the young woman who had captured not just his attention, but his heart. The tension had reached its peak. Every glance, every word, and every subtle gesture was a step toward an inevitable confrontation. The forbidden bond between master and slave deepened. Eleanor's wrath grew, and the stage was set for a collision that would shatter the illusions of control and reveal the dangerous truths lurking beneath the polished surface of the Duval mansion. The following morning, the Duval mansion was alive with tension so thick it seemed to cling to the air. News of Jonathan's obvious attention to Celeste had begun to circulate quietly among the household and neighboring planters. Whispers slithered through the halls like venom, subtle yet lethal, as the gossip of the plantation world took hold. Eleanor, having anticipated this, seized the moment to exact her carefully measured revenge. She orchestrated a scene during breakfast, inviting a few neighboring planters and their wives to witness the household in what she framed as a display of order and propriety. Celeste, carrying the trays and serving the guests, moved with her usual poise, but every eye in the room followed her, judging, scrutinizing. Eleanor's gaze was the sharpest of all, calculated, cold, and merciless. "Celeste," Eleanor said smoothly, her voice cutting through the clatter of silverware and soft murmurs. "You've become quite noticeable lately. Some might even say your influence on the master is distracting." She let the words hang in the air, a deliberate accusation aimed at humiliating the young woman in front of everyone. Jonathan's face turned pale. He rose from his chair, a hand reaching out toward Celeste, but Eleanor's eyes met his with a commanding look that left him frozen. The guests, sensing the tension, shifted uncomfortably. The polite surface of plantation civility had cracked, and the fracture was visible to all. Celeste maintained her composure, though her heart raced. She bowed her head slightly, murmuring, "I only do my duties, ma'am." Every syllable was careful, measured, a dance of survival amid a storm of scrutiny and malice. Eleanor's smile widened, triumphant. "I'm sure the master would agree that you have overstepped your bounds." The words were soft but sharp, leaving no doubt about her intentions. She had forced the forbidden attachment into the open, creating a spectacle that left both master and slave vulnerable. Later that day, Jonathan retreated to his study, anger and desire warring within him. He had loved Celeste in a way that defied propriety, yet now the danger of exposure had become undeniable. Eleanor's schemes had stripped away the subtlety of his obsession, leaving it raw, visible, and dangerous. Celeste, aware that her survival depended on quick thinking, began plotting her next move. She could no longer rely solely on the master's favor. The mistress's wrath had escalated to a dangerous intensity. Her only chance was to navigate the storm carefully, turning Jonathan's obsession into a shield while preparing for the moment when escape or strategic leverage would become necessary. The tension within the household had reached a fever pitch. The overseers, who had once ruled through fear and intimidation, now hesitated, uncertain whom to obey. The other enslaved workers moved cautiously, aware that any misstep could provoke Eleanor's wrath or Jonathan's conflicted impulses. The delicate hierarchy of the plantation had been thrown into chaos. By evening, the confrontation reached its peak. Eleanor cornered Jonathan in the drawing room, her words sharp and precise. "You have embarrassed us both," she said, her tone icy. "Your obsession is no longer secret, and it will not go unpunished. Either you end this or the consequences will destroy us all." Jonathan's face flushed with frustration and desire, torn between his wife's fury and his attachment to Celeste. His heart pounded. Yet he realized Eleanor's threat carried weight, not just socially but legally and physically. The plantation's reputation, his authority, and the safety of everyone within the household now depended on decisions made in the span of moments. Celeste, listening from a distance, understood the danger. Every interaction, every confrontation had escalated beyond subtlety into a dangerous game of power, obsession, and survival. The choices she made next would determine not only her fate, but the fragile balance of the entire household. As night fell, the Duval mansion was a web of fear, desire, and betrayal. Jonathan's obsession had been exposed, Eleanor's wrath unleashed, and Celeste's cunning tested as never before. The stage was set for a final reckoning, where secrets would be revealed, loyalties tested, and the boundaries of love and power shattered beyond repair. The dawn broke over the Duval plantation with an uneasy stillness. The mansion was bathed in a soft golden light that hid the chaos of the previous day. Jonathan paced the hallways, torn between his obsession and the harsh reality of Eleanor's wrath. His heart, once consumed by desire, now felt the heavy weight of consequence. Every glance at Celeste reminded him of the danger he had allowed to spiral beyond control. Celeste, meanwhile, had retreated to the servant quarters, her mind racing. The exposure of Jonathan's obsession had changed everything. Eleanor's anger was a storm that could not be calmed, and the household hierarchy had shifted irreversibly. She realized that her only path to survival and perhaps to true freedom was to act decisively. The master's infatuation, once a threat, could now become a shield for her escape. Under the cover of early morning shadows, Celeste gathered what few belongings she could carry. She moved quietly, avoiding the gaze of Eleanor, whose suspicions had not yet translated into surveillance. Jonathan, distracted and conflicted, was unaware of the careful plan she was enacting. Her movements were deliberate, calculated, every step a blend of courage and cunning. As she approached the edge of the plantation grounds, a network of allies she had quietly cultivated over months awaited her. These were men and women committed to aiding enslaved individuals seeking freedom, willing to risk everything to see justice and independence achieved. With a mixture of relief and resolve, Celeste joined them, moving swiftly toward the safety of the northern states. Jonathan discovered her absence only later, moments too late. Panic surged through him, not for himself but for the consequences he now faced. Eleanor's wrath had been directed at both of them, and the scandal of his obsession, now laid bare to the household and visitors alike, could ruin him socially, financially, and morally. He realized that his desire, which had once seemed intoxicating and inevitable, had become a prison of its own making. Eleanor, meanwhile, seethed. Her victory in exposing Jonathan had been only partial. The one she sought to control had eluded her grasp. She raged in silence, the mansion echoing with her frustration. Yet in that fury she could do little. Celeste had disappeared, carried away by a world that valued cunning and survival over the strict hierarchies Eleanor had once enforced. Far from the mansion, Celeste's journey northward was filled with danger, uncertainty, and fleeting moments of triumph. She relied on her wits, her knowledge of the estate, and the network of freedom seekers guiding her to safety. Each step carried the weight of her past suffering, but also the exhilaration of freedom she had never before experienced. She was no longer merely surviving. She was asserting her freedom in a world that had sought to deny it. Weeks passed, and the northern settlement became a haven. Celeste, now beyond the reach of the Duvals, began to reclaim her identity, her independence, and her dignity. She found allies, forged new bonds, and shared the story of her survival, not as a tale of subjugation, but as a testament to courage, intelligence, and the delicate navigation of desire and danger. Jonathan remained behind, a man trapped by his own obsession, a cautionary figure of desire unchecked by reason or restraint. Eleanor, too, endured the quiet torment of her ambition unfulfilled. The mansion, once a symbol of control and propriety, now stood as a monument to the consequences of obsession, secrecy, and mismanaged desire. Celeste's legacy, whispered among the northern communities and the fleeing enslaved, was one of resilience and cleverness. She had survived the dangerous attention of a master, the wrath of a wife, and the treacherous currents of the plantation. In doing so, she had transformed from a silent observer to an active agent of her own destiny, a living testament to the power of wit, patience, and courage in a world built on oppression. The Duval plantation remained a gilded cage, but Celeste had stepped beyond its boundaries, carrying with her the unyielding truth. Freedom was not given. It was claimed, navigated, and defended with every heartbeat. And for Celeste, that freedom was finally, irrevocably, hers.